I was 29 when I walked into my master bedroom and found my husband tangled in the sheets with my maid of honor. 5 years later, standing in the opulent ballroom of the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton for the wedding of my cousin, that same ex-husband deliberately sloshed red wine down the front of my silk dress. He leaned in, his smirk dripping with arrogance, and whispered that discarding me was the most profitable decision he ever made. But the real shock came seconds later, when a little girl in a custom designer gown rushed through the crowd, wrapped her arms around my waist, and yelled, "Mommy." And the towering, fiercely protective man who walked in right behind her was about to turn the perfect facade of this entire family into dust. Before I reveal what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch karma finally catch up to the people who broke you. My name is Zara. I am 34 years old, and tonight was supposed to be a simple family obligation. The air in the ballroom was thick with expensive perfume and the suffocating pressure of maintaining our flawless image of success. I was standing near the ice sculpture minding my own business when Marcus and Layla cornered me. Marcus, wearing a tuxedo he definitely could not afford, bumped into me hard. The dark red Cabernet splashed violently across the cream silk of my dress. He did not even pretend it was an accident. "Look at you, Zara," he sneered, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding guests. Still wearing last season clearance rack fashion, still dragging that pathetic, lonely energy everywhere you go. I guess being a barren failure really takes a toll on a woman. 5 years ago, those words would have shattered me. 5 years ago, when he and Layla conspired to drain our joint accounts, leaving me with nothing but medical debt from my failed fertility treatments, I would have cried. Tonight, I just looked at the wine stain and smiled. Layla stepped forward, her hand resting possessively on his chest. She was dripping in diamonds that caught the chandelier light, making sure everyone could see the massive pendant resting against her collarbone. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of cheap champagne and malice. "You really should be thanking us, Zara. If you had not given up your half of the startup fund during the divorce, Marcus never could have bought me this stunning necklace for our anniversary. It is vintage Cartier, by the way. I know you could never appreciate the finer things, but it is nice to see your sacrifice went to a good cause." She let out a high-pitched, grating laugh that echoed over the string quartet playing in the background. They stood there, a united front of betrayal, expecting me to crumble. They wanted a reaction. They wanted the crazy emotional ex-wife narrative to entertain the wealthy guests and secure their spot at the top of the social hierarchy. I stared right back at her, feeling absolutely no urge to defend my life choices to a woman who built her entire existence on the foundation of my stolen resources. I opened my mouth to reply, but a sharp, joyful voice pierced through the heavy tension of the ballroom. "Mommy." A 7-year-old girl wearing a custom miniature gown broke through the circle of whispering relatives and threw her arms around my waist. She buried her face in my dress completely, ignoring the wine stain, her bright eyes looking up at me with pure adoration. "I love you, Mommy," she beamed, squeezing me tightly. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly dropping his own glass onto the polished marble floor. The smug smile froze on the face of Layla, her eyes darting frantically between me and the happy child holding my hand. "You cannot have kids," Marcus stammered, the color completely draining from his face as he stared at the little girl. "You are barren. The doctor said so. Who is this kid?" Before I could answer his ridiculous question, a massive shadow fell over us. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Julian stepped up right beside me. Standing 6'3", tailored impeccably, in a dark suit that screamed generational wealth, he exuded a quiet, terrifying authority. He did not spare Marcus a single glance. Instead, he pulled a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently dabbed the spilled wine from my dress. "I told you not to stand so close to people drowning in debt, my love," Julian said, his voice smooth and deadly calm. "Their desperation is highly contagious." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to falter, lowering their bows as everyone strained to hear the confrontation unfolding. But the shock was quickly broken by a loud, abrasive scoff coming from the right side of the room. Trent, the white husband of my sister, pushed his way to the front of the crowd with an arrogant swagger. Trent had always used the supposed wealth of his family to belittle the rest of us, treating my relatives like charity cases, while demanding constant respect and admiration from everyone. He looked Julian up and down, his lips curled in a condescending sneer. "Look at this," Trent announced to the silent room, shaking his head in mock pity. "Zara actually went out and rented a fake family for the night just to impress us. Tell me, buddy, what exactly is your hourly rate for this gig? Are you just the rented driver, or did she hire you straight from a local talent agency to play the rich, protective husband? You people are truly pathetic, always trying to pretend you belong in places where you clearly just do not belong." The silence following Trent and his arrogant declaration stretched tight across the ballroom. He stood with his shoulders squared, projecting the unearned confidence of a man who mistook his skin color and inherited credit line for actual accomplishment. My mother, Brenda, materialized from the crowd right on cue. She wore a heavy silk gown that looked more appropriate for a coronation than a family wedding. Her lips pressed into a thin line of absolute disapproval. She glared at me and then shot a dismissive look at Julian and Mia. "Zara, what on earth is wrong with you?" Brenda hissed, keeping her voice low but laced with venom, so the church elders at the next table would not hear. "You bring this ghetto drama into your cousin Serena and her beautiful reception. You drag a random man and a child in here just to make a scene because you cannot stand to see Marcus thriving." I looked at the woman who brought me into this world. Her obsession with our family image of Black excellence was a disease that infected every interaction we ever had. I did not make a scene. "Mother," I replied, my voice completely steady. "Marcus threw his cheap wine on me, and Trent just insulted my husband." Trent laughed, a sharp barking sound that grated against my ears. "Husband," he mocked. "Please, Zara. We all know you are practically bankrupt. You work some entry-level accounting job. You expect us to believe you bagged a guy wearing a bespoke suit and a platinum watch. He is probably an actor you hired off the internet to save face." Brenda nodded in rapid agreement, turning her back to me completely. "Trent is exactly right," she said, waving a manicured hand toward the back of the room. "Trent, please tell the catering staff to move her seat. Put her at table 42 near the kitchen, swinging doors. She does not deserve to be in the photographs. We have prominent community leaders here tonight, and I will not let you ruin our reputation with your pathetic lies." Trent snapped his fingers at a passing waiter who flinched but stopped. "Hey, buddy," Trent commanded, pointing a finger at my face. "This woman and her hired help need to be relocated to the overflow section immediately. They are disrupting the VIP guests and lowering the class of this entire establishment." The waiter looked terrified, glancing between Trent and Julian. Before the poor guy could speak, Layla stepped forward, clutching a gold-embossed seating card. She pressed herself against Marcus, looking at me with pure triumph. "It really is for the best, Zara," Layla said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We are sitting at the head table with your mother and the pastors. It would just be too awkward for you to watch us." Brenda reached out and patted the hand of Layla, a gesture of maternal affection she rarely ever showed me. "Layla is family now, Zara," my mother announced coldly. "Layla gave Marcus a beautiful, healthy son to carry on his legacy. All you ever gave this family was a stack of expensive medical bills from those pointless fertility treatments. You drained your own bank accounts trying to fix your broken body, and then you expected us to pity you. Layla belongs at the head table. You belong out of sight." The cruelty of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. 5 years ago, she had said almost the exact same thing to me in the driveway of my own home when Marcus locked me out. She had stood on the porch and told me that a barren wife was a useless wife. She had chosen the cheating son-in-law over her own flesh and blood because Marcus had promised to donate a new wing to her church. She traded her daughter for front row seats at Sunday service. I felt Mia tighten her little grip on my hand. I squeezed back, letting her know she was safe. I did not shed a single tear. The woman standing before me was not a mother. She was just a public relations manager for a failing brand. Julian shifted his weight slightly. He had been perfectly still, absorbing every word, every insult, every piece of toxic garbage my family threw at me. He did not yell. He did not match the erratic, frantic energy of Trent or Brenda. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, pressing a single button. A man in a sharp black suit immediately sprinted across the ballroom floor. It was Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the Ritz-Carlton. He was sweating profusely, his eyes wide with panic as he shoved past the crowd of whispering guests. He ignored Trent entirely. He bypassed my mother and Marcus. He stopped directly in front of Julian and bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Vanguard, sir," the manager gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "I was not informed you would be arriving tonight. Please accept my deepest apologies for the delay. How can the staff assist you?" Trent dropped his arrogant smirk, his face contorting into a mask of pure confusion. "Wait a minute," Trent stammered, stepping forward. "Why are you bowing to him? I paid the deposit for this reception room. I am the VIP here." Mr. Sterling shot Trent a look of utter disdain before turning his absolute attention back to Julian, waiting for an order. Julian looked down at the wine stain on my dress and then glanced toward the front of the room, where the massive floral arrangements decorated the head table. He did not even acknowledge the existence of Trent. "Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice commanding and completely devoid of warmth. "Clear the head table immediately. Remove the name cards, remove the chairs, and remove anyone who tries to sit there. My wife prefers the view from the center of the room and dislikes sitting with hired help." Mr. Sterling did not hesitate. He snapped his fingers and a dozen waiters swarmed the area. They physically lifted the massive floral arrangements and moved the heavy chairs. Brenda gasped, clutching her chest as she was forced to step aside. Trent stood completely frozen, his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. Marcus gripped the edge of a chair, his knuckles turning white as he watched his VIP status evaporate. Julian guided me forward with a gentle hand resting on the small of my back. He pulled out a newly placed chair at the absolute center of the room for me. Mia scrambled into the seat next to mine, giggling as a waiter placed a special dessert plate in front of her. The rest of my family scrambled to find seats at the newly assembled side tables. Their grand display of superiority had crumbled into ashes in a matter of seconds. I took a slow sip of sparkling water, feeling the heavy stares of the congregation burning into the side of my head. Marcus could not handle the quiet humiliation. He dragged a heavy wooden chair from a nearby table and planted himself directly across from Julian, projecting a fake smile. He cleared his throat loudly, ensuring that everyone within hearing distance would tune into his conversation. "So Zara," he began, his voice dripping with forced confidence. "I suppose congratulations are in order for landing such a wealthy sponsor. It must be quite a relief for someone in your position. But you know, money can never buy actual talent or drive." He adjusted his cufflinks, making sure the expensive metal caught the light. "I just finalized a massive deal this morning. $40 million in venture capital funding for my tech firm. It is a truly historic and unprecedented valuation." Brenda clapped her hands together, emitting a loud gasp of sheer joy. "40 million," she practically shouted so the entire room could hear. "Oh, Marcus, that is just magnificent. We are so incredibly proud of you." Layla preened, resting her head on his shoulder and shooting me a look of pure pity. "It is so nice to have a husband who builds empires, Zara. What is it that you do again?" "Oh, right, you are working some little accounting job, tracking spreadsheets for middle management. That must be so very tedious compared to shaping the future of modern global technology." Marcus let out a deep, booming laugh that carried over the elegant music. He leaned across the table, pointing a finger at me. "I remember those pathetic nights in our old apartment. You used to stay up until 3 in the morning typing away on your cheap laptop. You were so convinced your little coding hobby was going to change the world. You wrote lines of basic code until your fingers cramped. But it took a real visionary to take that messy framework and perfect the algorithm. I took your raw garbage and transformed it into beautiful, pure, absolute gold. You built the foundation, but I built the skyscraper, he bragged, taking a sip of his bourbon. Investors do not care about the person sweating in the background. They care about the face of the company. They care about the man who can walk into a boardroom and demand $40 million without blinking. I pitched that algorithm to the biggest venture capital firm in the state, and they practically threw their money at me. You could never have done that, Zara. You lack the charm, the intelligence, and the relentless drive required to win in this cold, vicious industry. Julian remained perfectly still beside me, his dark eyes locked onto Marcus with the intensity of a predator studying a completely oblivious prey. He did not say a word, allowing Marcus to dig his own grave with every arrogant syllable. I calmly reached for my crystal glass, feeling the cool condensation against my fingertips. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, letting the silence stretch out and make the entire table uncomfortable. Layla smirked, assuming my silence was an admission of defeat. Brenda rolled her eyes, clearly disgusted that I had nothing to say in my own defense. I set the glass down gently on the pristine white tablecloth. You mean the proprietary algorithm with the fatal backdoor flaw deeply embedded into line 402? I asked, my voice smooth and conversational. The color instantly drained from the confident face of Marcus. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You see, Marcus, when you stole my raw garbage, you never bothered to check the foundational security protocols? I continued, leaning forward slightly. You just wrapped my code in a shiny new interface and sold it to the highest bidder without running any proper testing whatsoever. Brenda frowned, looking back and forth between us. What is she talking about? Marcus? Layla gripped his arm, her heavy diamond necklace sparkling as she leaned in. Honey, what does she mean by a fatal flaw? Marcus ignored them, his breathing growing shallow and rapid as panic set in. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the crystal glass. The funny thing about venture capital firms is that they employ elite security analysts before transferring $40 million, I said, keeping my tone icy and precise. They comb through every single line of code to protect their massive global financial investments. Julian smiled for the first time tonight, a cold, razor-sharp curve of his lips. He finally spoke, his deep voice resonating with ultimate power. You see, Marcus Vanguard Capital is my firm. We flagged your stolen, corrupted algorithm and officially froze your funding exactly 10 minutes ago. Your company is currently worth absolutely nothing. The silence at the table was completely deafening. Marcus stared at Julian with bulging, terrified eyes, realizing his entire fabricated empire had just collapsed. Right on cue, the cell phone inside the tuxedo pocket of Marcus instantly began to ring, frantically demanding an immediate answer. Marcus fumbled with his jacket, pulling the vibrating phone from his pocket with violently shaking hands. The caller ID flashed brightly enough for everyone nearby to see the Vanguard Capital logo. He stared at the glowing screen as if it were a venomous snake before hitting the red reject button. His manufactured confidence completely evaporated, leaving behind a pale, sweating shell of a man. Layla clutched his arm, her diamond necklace suddenly looking like a heavy chain pulling her down. She demanded to know what was happening, but Marcus could not form a coherent sentence to save his miserable life. He looked frantically around the silent room, his eyes darting past the confused church elders and landing directly on Trent. Trent perceived this as his ultimate moment to shine brightly in front of the entire assembly. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and stepped forward, puffing his chest out to command the room. He positioned himself between Marcus and Julian, adopting the stance of a benevolent protector dealing with unruly children. Trent always viewed our family as a pathetic charity project he graciously adopted. He placed a heavy hand on the shoulder of Marcus and offered a patronizing, sympathetic smile. "Do not worry about this minor setback," Marcus Trent announced loudly, ensuring his booming voice carried to the back tables. "These venture capital firms play hardball, but they do not control the entire financial ecosystem. I will simply have my family trust wire the $40 million to your business accounts on Monday morning. We consider it a minor investment in a highly promising venture." Brenda let out a loud, dramatic sigh of absolute relief. She pressed her hands to her chest, praising Trent for his immense generosity and elite upbringing, while pointedly glaring at me with utter absolute disdain. She loudly reminded the surrounding guests that Trent came from old money, a lineage of true American success that always protected its own. Trent soaked up the praise of my mother like a dry sponge. He turned his attention back to me and Julian, his eyes narrowing with arrogant amusement. "You see, Zara, this is how real wealth operates," he lectured, his tone dripping with thick condescension. "You folks just do not understand high-level finance. You get a little bit of money, and you think you can walk into a nice country club and dictate the rules to them. But true power is quiet, and it is deeply established in history. It requires a certain pedigree that you simply cannot buy or fake." I felt my jaw clench at the thinly veiled racial microaggression. Trent had a terrible habit of using phrases like "you folks" whenever he wanted to remind us of our supposed place in society. He loved playing the white savior to a black family he secretly considered far beneath him. He looked over at my sister Jasmine, who was sitting quietly at the end of the table, staring down silently at her completely untouched dinner plate. Jasmine had always been the quiet one, the submissive sister who bent to the will of my mother to keep the peace. Trent pointed at her as if she were a shiny prize he had won at an auction. "Look at my beautiful wife, Jasmine." Trent continued pacing slowly back and forth across the floor. Before she met me, she was perfectly content working a mediocre job and living in a cramped apartment. She had no vision for her future because she lacked the proper guidance. I brought her into a glorious world of genuine privilege and absolute limitless opportunity. I elevated her lifestyle, introduced her to the right people, and showed her how to conduct herself in polite society. I saved her from a life of absolute mediocrity. Now she runs her own boutique design firm funded entirely by my capital. That is what real provision looks like, Julian. Jasmine shrank further into her seat, her shoulders hunched forward. She did not defend herself against his cruel public humiliation. She never did. Brenda, however, nodded enthusiastically, agreeing that Trent was the greatest blessing to ever happen to our family. My mother was completely blinded by the dangerous financial illusion. My mother willingly allowed him to degrade her own daughter in front of a room full of people because she worshipped his generational wealth. "You can try to ruin this wedding reception with your petty vendettas," Zara, Trent said, stopping a few feet away from us. "You can try to embarrass Marcus because you are bitter about your divorce. But my family resources will always be here to fix whatever mess you create. Your little stunt with Vanguard Capital means absolutely nothing when I can write a check to cover the entire financial loss before I eat my morning breakfast. So why do you not take your rented boyfriend and your adopted prop and leave before I have security physically remove you today?" Mia shrank behind my leg, clutching my silk dress. I put a protective hand on her head, glaring at Trent. Before I could utter a single word, Julian moved. He did not raise his voice or match the aggressive posturing of Trent. He calmly reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and retrieved a slim black tablet. Julian tapped the screen twice, and a bright document filled with official government seals magically appeared before us. He held the tablet up so Trent could see the screen clearly. Trent squinted at the document, his arrogant smile slowly faltering. "You speak with incredible authority about the power of your family trust, Trent," Julian said, his voice deadly calm. "It is a fascinating narrative. However, the federal government seems to have a very different perspective on your financial situation. This is an official public record detailing the total dissolution of your trust 3 years ago for tax fraud." "So, Trent, whose money are you actually spending?" Julian asked, watching the color drain from the face of the man. Trent opened his mouth, but only a pathetic stuttering sound emerged as he stared at the glowing tablet screen, completely exposing his fraudulent existence. He looked frantically toward the exit, but before Julian could press him further, Jasmine slammed her hands down on the table and shot up from her chair. The sudden violent movement caused several crystal glasses to rattle and tip over, spilling water across the expensive linen. Jasmine marched around the table and planted herself firmly in front of Trent, shielding him with her own body. Her eyes were blazing with a frantic, desperate kind of anger that only comes from someone terrified of facing the truth. "Stop right there, Zara!" Jasmine screamed, her voice echoing off the ceilings of the ballroom. "You are out of line. You march in here trying to destroy my husband because you are eaten alive by your own bitter jealousy. Trent has given me a beautiful life. He elevated my business and put a roof over my head. Just because you completely failed at your marriage and let Marcus walk all over you does not give you the right to try and forcefully tear down my happiness. You want everyone in this room to be as miserable and broken as you are." I watched my younger sister hyperventilating in her custom gown, defending the very man who was actively destroying her life. It was a tragic display of blind loyalty. Brenda did not miss a beat. Seeing her golden son-in-law under attack, my mother rose from her seat with the fury of a disturbed hornet. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her heavy diamond bracelets clanking with the aggressive gesture. "You listen to me right now, Zara," Brenda commanded, her voice vibrating with pure toxic venom. "Trent is a respected pillar of this family. He comes from a prominent, wealthy background, and he has been nothing but generous to us. You are a disgrace to the name of this family. You bring this rented thug into a sacred family event to flaunt fake documents and spread vicious lies. I will not tolerate this ghetto behavior for one more second. If you do not apologize to Trent and Marcus, I will disown you. I will cut you out of my will, remove you from the family trust, and make sure you never see a single dime from the estate I spent my entire life building. You will be dead to me, Zara." The shocked guests at the surrounding tables gasped, whispering frantically among themselves. A mother publicly disowning her daughter at a wedding reception was the ultimate scandal. Brenda stood tall, breathing heavily, expecting me to cower and beg for her forgiveness, just like I used to do when I was younger. She expected the threat of losing my inheritance to bring me to my knees. I did not blink. I slowly unclasped my clutch. I did not raise my voice or match their unhinged emotional outbursts. I simply reached inside and pulled out a thick-bound stack of official bank statements and property records. I took 3 slow, deliberate steps forward, closing the distance between us. Brenda glared at me, expecting an apology. Instead, I tossed the heavy stack of papers directly onto her lap. They hit her silk gown with a solid thud, sliding slightly before she instinctively caught them with both hands. "You cannot disown me from a bankrupt estate, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that cut sharply through the murmurs of the crowd. Brenda looked down at the papers in her hands, her brow furrowing in confusion. Jasmine peered over the shoulder of our mother, her defensive posture faltering as her eyes scanned the text at the top of the first page. Trent let out a strangled gasp and tried to snatch the papers away, but Julian stepped forward, blocking his path with a broad shoulder. Julian stared down at Trent silently, daring him to make another move. Trent instantly backed away, swallowing hard. "Read them," I instructed, keeping my eyes locked onto my mother. "Read them out loud to the pastors and the community leaders sitting at your VIP table. Read the part where Trent took out not 1 but 3 secondary mortgages on your house over the past 18 months. You gave him the power of attorney to manage your retirement portfolio because you thought his white skin and fake pedigree made him a financial genius. He leveraged your entire estate to pay off his gambling debts and fund his luxury car leases. Your house is currently in active foreclosure, Brenda. The bank is legally seizing the entire property on Monday morning." Brenda let out a choked sound. Her hands shook violently as she flipped to the second page of the document, her perfect nails tearing the paper in her haste. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking into a sob. "No, this cannot be right. Trent told me the estate was thriving. He told me the investments were yielding massive financial returns." I turned my attention to Jasmine, who was staring at the third page of the packet with a look of pure horror. The blood had left her face, making her look like a pale ghost standing under the chandelier. Her hands trembled as she pointed at the numbers printed on the ledger. "And as for your boutique design firm, Jasmine, I continued, my tone merciless. Trent did not fund your business, he drained it. Turn to page 4 and look at the corporate withdrawal history. He has been systematically siphoning money from your operating accounts for 2 years. Every dollar of profit you made, every client payment you secured was immediately transferred into an offshore account to maintain the illusion of his wealth. You are not a successful business owner, Jasmine. You are the unknowing sugar mama to a broke, pathetic con artist who used your blind devotion to bleed you completely dry. Jasmine collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, as the dark reality of her completely ruined business finally sank in. Trent took a quick step backward, frantically looking for an immediate escape route, but Julian simply crossed his strong arms, effectively blocking any potential exit. The entire elegant ballroom had rapidly descended into a state of shocked, frantic whispering. People were pulling out their shiny new phones, eagerly texting the scandalous details to anyone who was not present today. Seeing her husband Marcus completely destroyed, and her new wealthy social circle crumbling so fast, Layla desperately needed to regain control of the narrative. She could not stand the spotlight shining on my personal victory. Layla snatched a massive, intricately painted ceramic vase from a nearby display table and marched directly toward Serena, who had been sitting frozen in her beautiful white wedding gown. Layla held the heavy object up high like a championship trophy, forcing a bright, artificial smile onto her face to mask the panic. She cleared her throat loudly, demanding the absolute attention of every single wealthy guest in the silent room, before boldly speaking to the crowd. "Listen, everyone!" Layla shouted, her shrill voice cutting through the heavy tension like a rusty knife. "We are gathered here today to celebrate love and family, not to indulge in Zara and her pathetic fabricated financial documents. Marcus and I wanted to give Serena a wedding gift that truly reflects our immense success and our deep appreciation for high culture." She shoved the vase onto the center of the head table right in front of the stunned bride. "This is an authentic 18th century Ming Dynasty vase. Marcus had it imported directly from an elite private collector in Beijing. It is valued at exactly $50,000. She turned her head and sneered directly at me, pointing a long acrylic nail at the flat white envelope resting near my designated plate. "It is certainly a step up from whatever cheap $50 gift card Zara stuffed into that pathetic little paper envelope." Serena looked down at the large ceramic object with wide, fearful eyes. She did not want to be dragged into this vicious crossfire, but Layla was absolutely determined to use the bride as a human shield against the looming financial devastation. Layla puffed out her chest, leaning against Marcus, who was still frantically trying to reboot his dead cell phone. "We know how to treat family properly," Layla bragged loudly, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "We do not bring fake bank statements to a wedding to ruin the joyous mood. We bring generational wealth and undeniable class." I slowly stood up from my chair, leaving Julian and Mia at the center table. I walked at a measured, calm pace toward the head table. The expensive silk of my gown rustled softly against the floorboards. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, instinctively sensing that the true carnage had only just begun. I stopped directly in front of Layla and the supposedly priceless antique vase. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the table, and stared closely at the painted ceramic surface. Layla crossed her arms over her chest, looking incredibly smug. "Do not touch it, Zara," she warned sharply. "You could never afford to replace something so exquisite if you broke it. Your entire yearly salary could not cover the intricate brushwork on the handles alone." I ignored her pathetic warning. I narrowed my eyes, focusing on a very specific patch of blue paint near the base of the vase. The color was entirely too bright, the glaze completely uneven. I recognized the extremely poor craftsmanship immediately. It was the exact same type of cheap synthetic glaze used on the counterfeit items sold at the discount flea market downtown. "You are an expert at presenting cheap fakes as valuable treasures, Layla," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. "It is a talent you have spent years perfecting at my personal expense." Layla flinched, her eyes darting nervously toward Marcus. "I do not know what you are talking about," she stammered defensively. I am talking about my solid gold graduation jewelry. I replied, my words hitting the air like physical strikes. I am talking about the beautiful custom engraved necklace and heavy bracelet my late grandmother left specifically for me. You lived in my guest room rent-free for 6 entire months. You claimed you were trying to find a decent job, but you were actually plotting against my marriage. During that time, you crept into my bedroom, stole my graduation jewelry, pawned it for quick cash to buy designer shoes, and replaced my precious heirlooms with worthless brass knockoffs from a mall kiosk. You stole my history just so you could pretend to be wealthy. The crowd gasped collectively. Brenda covered her mouth with a trembling hand, completely unable to defend the woman she had just praised. Marcus stared at Layla in absolute horror, finally realizing the monster he had married. Layla shook her head wildly, backing away from the table. "That is a lie!" she shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical pitch. "You are just making up insane stories because you are jealous of this magnificent gift. This vase is an immaculate, priceless artifact, and you are just a bitter ex-wife." I did not argue with her frantic screaming. I simply reached out and pressed my thumbnail directly against the bright blue paint at the very bottom edge of the supposedly ancient artifact. Layla held her breath as I applied a tiny amount of pressure and easily scraped off a thick layer of wet, peeling synthetic glaze. The cheap blue paint curled away instantly. It revealed a perfectly preserved barcode and a bright white factory sticker reading, "Made in China," hidden underneath. Serena looked at the exposed sticker, covered her face with her hands, and burst into loud, humiliating tears. The crowd watched the fake antique crumble. Pieces of blue-painted ceramic flaked off onto the pristine white tablecloth like cheap plastic confetti. Serena buried her face in her hands and wailed loudly. The devastating sound of the weeping bride finally snapped her father out of his stunned, paralyzing silence. Uncle David shot up from his chair so fast it tipped over backwards and crashed violently onto the hardwood floor. He was a large, imposing man who had spent the entire evening trying to maintain a dignified, proud posture, but the sheer level of toxic public humiliation had finally pushed him over the edge. He slammed his heavy fist down onto the table, making the silverware rattle violently against the expensive bone china plates. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury as he glared at everyone involved in the escalating conflict. Layla desperately tried to cover the exposed white factory sticker with her hands, but the undeniable proof of her pathetic deception was already burned into the memories of every single guest in the ballroom. She looked like a trapped animal shrinking back against the edge of the head table. Marcus refused to even look at her. He was still staring blankly at the dark screen of his cell phone, his mind completely shattered by the loss of his $40 million venture capital funding. Brenda pressed a linen napkin to her forehead, breathing in rapid, shallow gasps as her perfect high society image disintegrated right before her eyes. The surrounding church elders and wealthy community leaders were openly pointing and whispering about the absolute disgrace unfolding at the front of the room. Uncle David raised his voice, booming over the frantic whispers of the shocked congregation. "Enough," he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson red. "I have sat here in silence while you people turned my beautiful daughter and her perfect wedding day into a disgusting circus sideshow. This was supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment. Instead, it has become a battleground for your petty financial squabbles and pathetic fake jewelry. Look at my daughter. She is completely heartbroken." David gestured wildly toward Serena, who was now actively sobbing into the shoulder of her terrified new husband. The elegant floral arrangements and the crystal glasses seemed to mock the absolute misery radiating from the bride. David took a deep breath, attempting to steady his trembling voice. "Who is paying for this absolute disaster?" David demanded, crossing his thick arms over his broad chest. "I want to know right now. Who is covering the astronomical costs of this completely ruined reception? Because I absolutely refuse to put my hard-earned money toward a party that has been destroyed by criminals, liars, and bankrupt frauds." The entire room fell into a deathly tense silence. No one dared to breathe or make a single sudden movement. Brenda looked away, completely unable to meet the furious gaze of her own brother. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat working nervously as the reality of his total financial ruin continued to suffocate him. Layla kept her eyes glued to the floor, utterly defeated. Trent perceived this tense silence as another golden opportunity to reclaim his damaged alpha status. He desperately needed to repair his public image after Julian completely exposed his dissolved family trust. Trent adjusted his bespoke suit jacket, smoothing down the expensive fabric with sweaty, trembling hands. He plastered a sickeningly arrogant smile across his face and stepped forward, deliberately placing himself between the furious father of the bride and the rest of the cowering family. Trent puffed out his chest, projecting the false, unearned confidence of a man who firmly believed his white skin and assumed wealth made him completely invincible. He looked around the ballroom, ensuring every single guest was paying absolute attention to his grand, heroic declaration. "David, please calm yourself down," Trent said, his voice dripping with smooth, condescending authority. "There is absolutely no need to panic over a few spilled drinks and some minor family disagreements. I completely understand your intense frustration regarding the current situation, but you do not need to worry about the financial burden of this evening. I already took care of everything." Trent paused dramatically, letting his words hang in the heavy air. "I personally paid the $100,000 venue fee for this entire ballroom early this morning. I handed my premium card directly to the hotel staff. I consider it a generous wedding gift to the bride and groom, a small token of my immense wealth and undeniable high-class status." Trent shot a vile, sneering look directly at me and Julian. He simply could not resist throwing another disgusting racial microaggression into the mix. "You folks just do not understand high-level finance," Trent mocked, shaking his head in fake pity. "You panic over every single dime because you are used to living in poverty. But people like me handle the problems. We do not let temporary setbacks destroy our composure. I saved Jasmine from a life of mediocrity, and I am happy to save this reception." Before Trent could finish patting himself on the back, Mr. Sterling, the hotel manager, stepped forward. His crisp black suit looked perfectly tailored. His posture was incredibly rigid, and his expression revealed absolutely no emotion. The entire congregation watched him approach with wide, terrified eyes, anticipating another massive social explosion. He bypassed the whispering guests and stopped firmly in front of Marcus, holding a small black folder out like a lethal weapon. "Excuse me for interrupting this gathering," Mr. Sterling said, opening the folder to reveal a declined receipt. "Sir, we have a serious problem." Marcus stared blankly at the red ink. "I just told everyone that I paid that bill," Trent insisted. Mr. Sterling slowly turned his absolute attention back to Marcus. "Sir, the card Mr. Trent provided is actually registered to your company, and it has been declined for insufficient funds. We need payment or we shut the power off." Marcus stared at the little black leather folder as if it contained a live explosive. He patted his pockets reflexively, searching for a miraculous solution that did not exist. Trent physically shrank back into the shadows of the floral arrangements, instantly shedding his arrogant billionaire persona. The horrifying reality of the situation washed over the entire room. The grand chandeliers flickered slightly, as if the hotel management was already preparing to execute their dark threat. Brenda let out a strangled gasp. Her eyes darted frantically toward the VIP tables, where Pastor Williams and the senior church elders sat watching the unfolding disaster with harsh, judgmental expressions. The absolute worst nightmare for a woman who worshipped social status was public poverty. The thought of the lights going out and her prominent guests being plunged into darkness was too much for her fragile ego to handle. She scrambled forward, her expensive heels slipping slightly on the polished floor. Brenda marched directly up to me, completely ignoring the wreckage of Layla and the fake Ming vase. She grabbed my forearm with claw-like fingers, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "Zara, you need to fix this immediately," Brenda hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic, desperate whisper. "You clearly have money now. You need to hand your credit card to Mr. Sterling right this second, Pay this venue fee and save this reception. You owe me this much. You must honor your mother and protect our family name from this unimaginable disgrace. Do not let these good church people see us like this." I calmly reached down and pried her trembling fingers off my arm one by one. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, maintaining absolute eye contact with the woman who had birthed me, but never truly loved me. "Honor you?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly across the silent room, ensuring the church elders heard every single syllable. "You want me to honor you by bailing out your bankrupt son-in-law and your fraudulent favorite daughter? That is incredibly ironic coming from a mother who stole my entire future just to buy VIP status at Sunday service." Brenda lost all the color in her face. She opened her mouth to deny it, but I cut her off instantly. "Do not bother lying, Brenda," I commanded, stepping closer until she was forced to retreat. "I remember exactly what happened the summer I was accepted into university. I worked 3 brutal jobs to save that tuition money. I trusted you to hold it in a joint account. But when the tuition deadline arrived, the account was completely empty. You drained every last cent of my hard-earned college fund. You took my money and bought Pastor Williams a brand new luxury car. You handed him the keys in front of the entire congregation, claiming it was a blessed donation from your own successful business. You sacrificed my education so you could sit in the front pew and be treated like royalty." Pastor Williams shifted uncomfortably in his seat at the VIP table. The surrounding church members began murmuring aggressively, casting disgusted looks at my mother. Brenda was practically hyperventilating now, her carefully constructed holy image burning to ashes right in front of her most coveted audience. She raised her hands defensively, trying to shush the hostile crowd. "That was in the past," Brenda stammered weakly, her eyes darting around the hostile room. "We are talking about right now, Zara. We need to pay for this wedding or we are ruined." I crossed my arms and offered her a cold, merciless smile. "Oh, I know exactly how you were planning to pay for this extravagant party, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "I know Trent was completely broke. I know Layla spent her last dime on counterfeit Chinese ceramics, but you promised them you would cover the venue fee today. And I know precisely which bank account you were planning to drain to make that happen." Brenda froze completely. Her breathing stopped, and a look of sheer, unadulterated terror possessed her features. I reached into my designer clutch and slowly pulled out a second stack of documents. These heavy papers were heavily stamped with official bank logos and federal routing numbers. I held them up for the entire ballroom to see, specifically angling them toward the church VIP table. "You are the lead treasurer for the Regional Church Youth Charity Fund," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "For the past 6 months, you have been systematically skimming donations meant for underprivileged children. You set up a web of fraudulent vendors and funneled the charity money directly into a secret financial institution. You were going to use the youth ministry fund to pay Mr. Sterling today." Pastor Williams stood up from his chair, his face dark with righteous fury. The congregation gasped in unison, absolutely sickened by the profound magnitude of her unholy crimes. Brenda let out a pathetic whimpering sound, shaking her head wildly. Her entire world was collapsing and there was no one left to blame. "No, Zara, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic sob. "Please do not do this to me." I slowly lowered the documents, tapping them against the palm of my hand. The power dynamic had completely shifted. I looked directly into her terrified eyes. The exceptionally heavy silence stretched out, seemingly lasting for an eternity, as every single person anxiously waited for my final devastating blow. The truth was a heavy burden, and Brenda was about to be crushed beneath its immense, agonizing weight. I took one final step toward her, ensuring there was absolutely no escape from the harsh reality of her own disgusting actions. The lights above us hummed gently, a sharp contrast to the brutal darkness consuming her soul. She absolutely deserved every single ounce of this righteous public destruction today. "Should I now show the pastor your secret offshore accounts, Mother?" Brenda collapsed into her chair, hiding her face behind trembling hands, as Pastor Williams stood up and walked away from the table in absolute disgust. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it did not last long. Marcus finally looked up from his dark phone screen. His face was pale and completely devoid of the smug arrogance he had worn all evening. He slowly turned his head to look at his new bride. Layla was still standing defensively near the shattered remains of her fake Ming vase, attempting to smooth down the front of her expensive silk gown. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing Layla by the wrist and yanking her toward him with a sudden explosive violence that made the surrounding guests gasp. "You did this to me," Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of the ballroom. "You drained every single cent out of the company operating accounts. You demanded the Paris honeymoon, the custom diamond rings, the imported cars. You told me your influencer brand would bring in millions of dollars in sponsorships to cover the massive debts we were accumulating. Instead, you blew through my entire venture capital funding in less than 6 months just to maintain a pathetic illusion of wealth on the internet. You are the reason my corporate card was just declined in front of the entire city. You bled my business completely dry. We are facing absolute bankruptcy because of your endless, relentless greed." Layla violently ripped her arm out of his grasp, her perfectly contoured face twisting into a dark mask of pure, feral rage. "Do not you dare blame me for your pathetic financial incompetence," Layla shrieked, stepping right up into his face. "You are a complete failure, Marcus. You always have been. You walked around calling yourself a tech visionary, but you never actually understood a single line of code. You just played the role of a successful CEO while blindly spending investors' money on expensive suits and exclusive country club memberships. You needed me to look the part of the perfect corporate wife because you had absolutely zero substance behind your smooth-talking presentations. I gave you the beautiful aesthetic you desperately craved, and you promised me endless luxury in return. You are nothing without my image propping you up." Marcus let out a harsh, bitter laugh, throwing his hands up into the air. "I gave you everything I had," he yelled back, his face red with fury. "I blew up my entire marriage for you. I left Zara because you swore we would build a massive empire together." Layla scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes with absolute contempt. She was so blinded by her own vicious anger that she completely lost control of her filter. "You think I actually wanted you for your brilliant personality?" she screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. "I only slept with you 5 years ago because you promised me Zara's half of the tech startup. You swore to me that once you pushed her out of the picture, her 50% equity would immediately transfer to my name. I endured your massive ego and your terrible business decisions because I was waiting for my massive payout. I only tolerated you because you promised me her millions." The entire ballroom erupted into chaotic gasps and shocked murmurs. Layla immediately slapped her hands over her mouth, realizing the catastrophic weight of the confession she had just screamed at the top of her lungs. She had publicly admitted to orchestrating a predatory affair solely to steal my business assets. Marcus looked like he had been physically struck, stumbling backward as the sheer depth of his new wife's manipulation crashed over him. He had traded a loyal partner for a gold-digging parasite who completely despised him. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the arguing couple, savoring the beautiful destruction of their toxic alliance. My high heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, demanding their absolute attention. Everyone in the room turned to watch me approach the completely broken groom and his deceitful bride. "You both built this entire elaborate fantasy on a catastrophic assumption," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy tension with icy precision. "You spent the last 5 years acting like you pulled off the ultimate corporate heist. You thought you successfully pushed me out of the company I built from the ground up, just by filing for a quick divorce and locking me out of the main office." Marcus glared at me, his chest heaving as he tried to salvage a shred of his dignity. "I am the listed CEO, Zara," he spat defensively. "I hold the primary shares. You walked away with absolutely nothing." I offered him a cold, merciless smile, relishing the absolute power I held in this exact moment. "About that startup," I said smoothly, tilting my head while looking directly into his terrified eyes. "You and your high-priced lawyers completely forgot to secure one tiny vital detail during the messy divorce settlement. You were in such a massive rush to move Layla into my house and claim my title that you never actually checked the original corporate filings. I never signed the final intellectual property transfer documents. The patent for the core algorithm that runs your entire platform is still registered exclusively under my maiden name. Without my proprietary software, your company is just an empty hollow shell with zero functional product to sell on the open market. I did not walk away with nothing, Marcus. I still legally own 51% of your company. Every single piece of code that makes the application function belongs solely to me. You have absolutely nothing left to offer your venture capital investors. Your professional reputation is completely dead. Layla stared at me in shock, finally comprehending that her grand prize was completely worthless. Her dream of becoming a billionaire wife evaporated into thin air, leaving her trapped. Marcus slowly dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor. The heavy thud of his knees hitting the polished wood echoed like a final gavel strike, signaling the absolute end of his pathetic, miserable corporate reign. Layla stared down at her ruined husband with absolute revulsion before whipping her head around to face me. The realization that she had prostituted her entire life for a completely bankrupt illusion finally snapped the last fragile thread of her sanity. Her eyes wildly scanned the room for any available weapon to use against me. Finding no financial leverage left, she locked her furious gaze onto the small, innocent figure standing quietly just a few feet away. 7-year-old Mia had been holding tightly to the fabric of my dress, her wide brown eyes watching the chaotic adult spectacle with quiet apprehension. Layla let out a shrill, malicious laugh that lacked any genuine humor, completely ignoring the devastated murmurs of the wealthy guests who were watching her meltdown. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at the little girl. "You think you have won, Zara?" Layla shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "You actually think exposing us magically fixes your pathetic, permanently empty life? Just look at this totally pathetic display. You actually brought a rented orphan prop to a family wedding just to make yourself look like a fulfilled, happy woman. You could not give Marcus a child, so you just dragged some random street kid in here to play dress-up and pretend you are not completely dead inside." The sheer cruelty of attacking a child sent a collective gasp rippling through the wealthy crowd. Even Trent looked slightly uncomfortable, but Brenda instantly saw an opening to reclaim her fractured moral authority. My mother stepped forward, her heavy diamond necklaces clanking against her chest as she aligned herself with Layla. "She is absolutely right," Brenda declared, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at me. "You are too fundamentally broken to be a real mother, Zara. You always have been. You lack the natural warmth and maternal instinct that Jasmine and Layla possess. Bringing this poor, confused child into our sacred family event is just another one of your selfish, manipulative stunts. You are using her for sympathy because you know you are a barren failure who will always end up completely alone." The venom dripping from my own mother's mouth was staggering, but it did not break me. It only solidified my absolute certainty that cutting these toxic people out of my life was the greatest victory I could ever achieve. I did not scream back or match their unhinged, frantic energy. I simply knelt down on the hardwood floor, bringing myself to eye level with the little girl who meant everything to me. I wrapped my arms around Mia, pulling her small, warm body securely against my chest, completely shielding her from their hateful glares. Mia rested her chin on my shoulder, entirely unaffected by the screeching women standing just a few feet away. "Do not listen to them, sweetheart," I whispered softly, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "They do not know anything about real love." I gently pulled back and smiled at her. "Why do not you show them the special drawing you made this morning?" Mia nodded bravely. She reached into her small velvet purse and pulled out a neatly folded piece of thick sketch paper. She carefully unfolded it, revealing a bright, colorful crayon drawing. It depicted 3 distinct stick figures, holding hands beneath a massive yellow sun. The figures were clearly labeled with clumsy, childish handwriting reading Daddy, Zara, and Mia. It was a beautiful testament to the family we had built together entirely out of pure love and mutual respect. I looked up at Brenda from the floor. my voice steady and completely void of the desperate approval-seeking tone I had used throughout my entire childhood. I did not rent a prop mother, I stated clearly, ensuring my words carried to the back of the silent ballroom. When her biological mother tragically passed away, I stepped up. I wiped away the tears I stayed up through the terrifying nightmares, and I built a safe, loving environment. I did the exact opposite of what you did to me. I actually nurtured a child, instead of treating her like a convenient accessory to boost my social status at the country club. I showed her what a real devoted mother looks like. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic scoff, waving her hand dismissively at the drawing. A crayon picture does not make you a parent, Zara, she mocked, rolling her eyes. You are just playing house with another man's burden. You have absolutely no legal or biological claim to that child. You are nothing to her but a temporary babysitter holding a fake title. The temperature in this ballroom seemingly plummeted 20 degrees in a single second. Julian had been standing quietly off to the side, observing the absolute destruction of my former abusers with calm, calculated patience. But the instant Brenda insulted his daughter, his entire demeanor changed. The quiet, supportive partner vanished completely, replaced by a terrifying, imposing force. Julian took 3 long, deliberate steps forward, instantly closing the distance between us and the 2 shrieking women. He placed one large, protective hand on my shoulder and used the other to gently guide Mia behind his solid frame. The sheer physical presence of the man forced Layla to stumble backward, while Brenda visibly shrank away from his piercing, icy stare. Julian looked down at Layla, his jaw clenched tight, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating register that sounded exactly like pure ice. Layla, you are speaking to the sole heir of the Vanguard Empire, he stated with absolute chilling authority. The entire room went dead silent as the magnitude of that name registered with the guests. Mia is my biological daughter, Julian continued, and Zara legally adopted her last month, which makes my wife a billionaire by proxy. Trent let out a sudden, sharp bark of laughter that cracked unpleasantly in the silent ballroom. He stepped out from the shadows of the floral arrangements, his face flushed an ugly shade of crimson. The polished veneer of the sophisticated aristocrat completely peeled away to reveal the bitter, desperate man underneath. You actually expect me to believe this absurd fairy tale? Trent sneered, his lip curling with intense disgust. He pointed a shaking finger at Julian, looking him up and down with undisguised contempt. You think having a heavy bank account suddenly makes you civilized or worthy of respect? You are nothing but street trash who stumbled into new money and bought a tailored suit. This entire family is a complete circus of low-class, uncultured animals. I am the only person in this room who actually understands pedigree and true social standing. Trent began pacing the floor, his voice growing louder and more unhinged with every step. I have spent 2 agonizing years pretending you people were socially acceptable. I sat through your loud, obnoxious dinners and smiled at your incredibly tacky holiday traditions. I had to watch absolute pathetic failures like Marcus parade around pretending to be executives while drowning in counterfeit debt. None of you belong in polite society, and you never will. Jasmine stood completely frozen beside him, her heart pounding violently against her ribcage. The sheer vitriol pouring out of her husband was a physical blow that left her breathless. She had spent their entire relationship shrinking herself to fit his impossible standard, and now he was publicly destroying her family. Trent then slowly turned his vicious glare directly toward his own wife. And you, Jasmine, he spat, stepping aggressively into her personal space. Do you have any idea how much money and exhausting effort it took to make you presentable to my colleagues? I paid thousands of dollars to have those awful natural curls burned out of your hair. I needed you to look elegant instead of looking completely unkempt and unrefined. I corrected your loud, obnoxious voice every single day until you learned how to speak properly. I forced you to abandon your embarrassing cultural habits just so you could stand beside me at the country club. I was terrified you would open your mouth and make me an absolute laughingstock in front of my peers. I took a worthless ghetto project and tried to mold you into a respectable society wife. But underneath the expensive designer clothes I bought you, you are just as pathetic and classless as the rest of your horrific bloodline. Jasmine felt the entire room spinning around her as a sickening wave of realization crashed over her mind. She vividly remembered the burning chemical relaxers that repeatedly blistered her scalp every month just to achieve the bone-straight look he demanded. She remembered brutally biting her tongue at endless corporate galas, constantly monitoring her volume and her vocabulary. She had lived in constant fear of him secretly pinching her arm under the table as a warning to be quiet. She had willingly erased her entire identity, abandoned her rich heritage, and alienated her true friends. She did all of this just to become a quiet, acceptable accessory for a man who fundamentally despised everything she was. "You never loved me, Trent," Jasmine whispered, her voice trembling slightly before finding a new core of solid, unyielding strength. "You just wanted a shiny trophy you could display to prove how incredibly tolerant and charitable you were." Trent scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes as if her pain was a tedious inconvenience. "Oh, please spare me the dramatic victim routine, Jasmine," he sneered, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "You gladly took my money and lived in my penthouse because you knew you could never achieve greatness on your own. You should be down on your knees thanking me for pulling you out of the gutter and showing you true luxury. Without my family name shielding you, you would be absolutely nothing in this city." Jasmine slowly lifted her chin, staring directly into the eyes of the man she had mistakenly sworn to love forever. "Your family name is completely worthless now, Trent," Jasmine stated, her voice slicing cleanly through his arrogant delusions. "You stand here lecturing us about pedigree and class while you owe millions of dollars to creditors. Your accounts are frozen and your trust fund is completely drained. You are a bankrupt fraud trying to lecture a self-made billionaire about what it takes to be successful." The surrounding crowd began murmuring aggressively, casting deeply disgusted looks at Trent as his financial ruin was laid bare again. He opened his mouth to shout another defense, but the sheer weight of his undeniable failure crushed the words in his throat. Jasmine calmly reached over to the nearest VIP dining table, her eyes never leaving Trent's furious, panicked face. She firmly wrapped her manicured hand around the neck of an open bottle of dark vintage red wine. "You spent years trying to wash the color and the culture out of me," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You made me hate my own reflection just so you could feel superior in your pathetic, empty little world. But you cannot wash away who I truly am, and I am entirely done pretending to be your perfect little puppet." Trent narrowed his eyes, taking a defensive half-step backward as he noticed the heavy glass bottle gripped tightly in her hand. "What are you doing, Jasmine?" he warned, his voice cracking with a sudden flash of genuine fear. "Put that down right now before you do something incredibly stupid and humiliate yourself further." Jasmine offered him a cold, brilliant smile that contained absolutely zero warmth. She stepped forward with lightning speed and raised her arm high into the air. "I am finally setting myself free, Trent," she declared with absolute undeniable finality. She tilted the heavy bottle forward. "I am officially filing for divorce." Jasmine stood incredibly tall and completely unwavering as the dark red vintage wine dripped steadily from Trent's utterly ruined designer suit, pooling darkly onto the polished marble floor beneath. The heavy glass bottle dangled loosely from her trembling fingers, empty and entirely discarded, just like the shattered fragments of her completely broken, isolated marriage. Trent furiously wiped the dripping alcohol from his burning eyes, his rigid hands shaking with a highly volatile mixture of profound shock and rapidly escalating uncontrollable fury. But instead of immediately exploding into senseless physical violence, he threw his head back and let out a sharp, remarkably patronizing laugh. It was a cold, highly calculating sound designed specifically to permanently diminish her sudden bravery and shatter her newfound confidence. He looked down at his stained jacket and then back up at his wife, shaking his head with absolute condescending amusement. "You actually think pouring a glass of wine on me changes anything, Jasmine?" he mocked loudly, his voice echoing across the silent ballroom. "You think declaring a divorce suddenly makes you an independent, empowered woman? You are completely delusional." Trent took a threatening step toward her, pulling a crisp white handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing at his ruined lapel. "Go ahead and file the pathetic paperwork," he challenged, his tone dripping with absolute arrogant certainty. "Run to the nearest courthouse and sign your name on the dotted line. But let me remind you of a few harsh legal realities before you pack your bags tonight." Trent stepped closer, towering over her with a menacing, cruel smirk. "You own absolutely nothing in our marriage, Jasmine." He spat, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The luxury penthouse overlooking the financial district is registered solely under my family trust. The imported cars you drive, the limitless credit cards in your wallet, and the expensive diamond jewelry hanging around your neck are all legally my property. We signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement that explicitly leaves you with zero assets if you ever choose to walk away. You want a divorce, fine. But understand that the second you walk out of this hotel, you are instantly homeless. You will not have a single penny to your name. You will be sleeping on the dangerous streets tonight with nowhere to go. You will be crawling right back to the pathetic, miserable poverty you originally came from. Do you honestly think you can survive out there without my money? You are entirely dependent on me for your basic survival." I moved smoothly across the floor, placing myself deliberately between my sister and her abusive husband. My heels clicked sharply against the polished wood, demanding his immediate attention. "Jasmine is not going to be sleeping on any streets tonight, Trent," I stated, my tone calm and dangerously level. I gently pushed Jasmine behind my shoulder, forming a protective barrier against his toxic intimidation. In fact, Jasmine will be sleeping comfortably in her own bed in the exact same penthouse she has lived in for the past 3 years. You are the only person in this room who needs to start worrying about finding a homeless shelter before midnight." Trent rolled his eyes and let out another harsh laugh, crossing his arms over his ruined suit. "Oh, please, Zara," he sneered, dismissing me entirely. "Do not try to play the protective hero. You might have scammed Marcus out of a worthless tech company, but you have absolutely no power over me or my massive real estate portfolio. My properties are completely secure." I tilted my head and offered him a slow, merciless smile. "Are they really secure, Trent?" I asked, watching the arrogant confidence flicker slightly in his eyes. "Because my financial advisors painted a vastly different picture of your pathetic empire. Let us talk about exactly what happened 3 months ago when your primary investors finally discovered your massive hidden gambling debts." Trent stiffened, his jaw clenching tightly. He glanced nervously at the surrounding guests, suddenly hyper-aware that his darkest secrets were being dragged into the harsh, unforgiving light. "You were facing total financial annihilation," I continued, projecting my voice so every single person could hear his miserable failures. "The banks were actively preparing to seize all of your commercial properties and permanently freeze your personal accounts. You were absolutely desperate for a massive infusion of cash to cover your fraudulent tracks. So you quietly auctioned off your entire residential portfolio, including the luxury penthouse you currently share with my sister. You sold every single deed at a catastrophic loss to a mysterious offshore holding company just to keep yourself out of federal prison." He swallowed hard beads of nervous sweat mixing with the drying wine on his forehead. "That was a private corporate transaction," he stammered weakly, his voice losing all its previous arrogant thunder. "It has absolutely nothing to do with you or Jasmine. I maintain a strict long-term lease agreement with the new ownership group." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a thick, folded stack of legal documents. I slowly unfolded the heavy parchment paper, smoothing out the creases with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I held the documents up, ensuring the official property seals and notarized signatures were fully visible to his terrified eyes. "You really should pay much closer attention to the parent companies you do business with, Trent," I said softly, stepping right up into his personal space. "The offshore holding company that bought your entire residential portfolio is a direct subsidiary of Vanguard Empire." I slowly lowered the documents, tapping them gently against his wine-stained chest. "I am the mysterious buyer. I own every single property you desperately sold, including the penthouse." I shoved the thick legal envelope directly into his trembling hands. The power dynamic in the room shattered completely, leaving him entirely defenseless. I looked him dead in the eyes and delivered the final crushing blow. I am the buyer. You have 24 hours to vacate my sister's property. Trent stood completely paralyzed, holding the legal envelope as if it contained a live explosive device. The sheer magnitude of his absolute defeat radiated outward, instantly silencing the remaining whispers in the opulent ballroom. Seeing the arrogant aristocrat utterly demolished flipped a switch of pure desperate survival instinct inside Marcus. His carefully styled hair was slightly disheveled from the escalating chaos, and the smug, confident smirk he had worn all evening had completely evaporated into thin air. He looked frantically between Julian, whose imposing silent presence radiated absolute authority, and me, the woman he had discarded like yesterday's trash. He realized with terrifying clarity that I was not just systematically dismantling Trent. I held the absolute controlling stake in his beloved tech firm, and his entire future rested in my hands. Marcus took 3 shaky steps forward and did the unthinkable. The man whose entire fragile ego was built on projecting dominance and wealth physically crumpled in front of everyone. His knees hit the polished hardwood floor with a loud, dull thud. A collective sharp gasp echoed through the wealthy crowd as the former golden boy of the country club debased himself. He clasped his hands together tightly, looking up at me with wide, desperate eyes perfectly designed to manufacture pity. He was throwing away every ounce of his pride in a frantic bid to save his bank account. "Zara, please," he begged, his voice cracking with highly practiced artificial emotion. "You have to listen to me. I was completely out of my mind back then." He aggressively pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at Layla, who was still reeling from the shock of Trent's destruction. "It was all her fault, Zara. Layla manipulated me from the very beginning. She deliberately poisoned my mind against you. She constantly whispered lies, telling me you were holding me back from my true potential. She orchestrated the entire affair and convinced me to forcefully push you out of the company. I was weak, and I let her toxic influence destroy the best thing I ever had." Layla let out a shrill screech of pure, unadulterated outrage, her manicured hands curling into tight, violent fists. Her jaw dropped open in sheer disbelief as the man she had stolen publicly threw her directly under the bus to save his own skin. She took a threatening step toward him, ready to unleash her fury, but Marcus completely ignored her screeching. He kept his pleading, pathetic gaze locked entirely on me. "I am so incredibly sorry, Zara," he pleaded, forcing tears to actually pool in the corners of his eyes. "I know I messed up terribly. I know I broke your heart and ruined our life. But that tech company is my entire life's work. It is my legacy. You have made your point tonight and you have won. Please, I am begging you on my knees, just give me my shares back and let me walk away with my dignity." I stared down at the pathetic man groveling on the floor. 5 years ago, seeing him in this debased position might have elicited a shred of sympathy from the naive, trusting woman I used to be. Today, it only highlighted his absolute cowardice. I did not bother raising my voice to match his frantic, chaotic energy. I simply reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the sleek screen a few times, navigating directly to an audio file I had preserved securely in a hidden cloud drive for half a decade. I synced my phone directly to the ballroom's sophisticated Bluetooth sound system with a single decisive tap. "You claim you are a helpless victim of manipulation, Marcus," I stated clearly, my voice carrying effortlessly over the dead silent room. "You claim you never truly wanted to hurt me and that Layla forced your hand. Let us hear exactly how much deep remorse you felt when you threw me out on the street." I pressed play. The massive ballroom speakers crackled slightly before Marcus's voice echoed violently off the crystal chandeliers. It was not the desperate, pleading tone he was using right now. It was a cruel, triumphant, and deeply malicious laugh. "Man, you should have seen her stupid face," the recorded voice of Marcus boasted loudly, the heavy background noise suggesting a crowded, noisy bar. "I locked her completely out of the company accounts and canceled all her credit cards while she was sleeping. She is packing her bags right now, crying her eyes out like a loser." I made absolutely sure she is leaving with zero equity. She is going to be completely destitute. Layla and I are celebrating in Cabo next week with her share of the profits. The harsh recording ended with another sharp bark of callous, arrogant laughter. The heavy, crushing silence that followed the recording was entirely suffocating. The wealthy guests exchanged deeply disgusted, horrified looks, recoiling from Marcus as if he carried a highly contagious disease. He remained frozen on his knees, the artificial tears drying instantly on his pale, bloodless cheeks. His jaw worked silently, frantically searching for a new lie, a new angle, any possible escape route from the damning reality of his own recorded words. He had gleefully engineered my total destruction, and the entire room had just witnessed his pure, unadulterated malice. I looked down at him, my expression entirely devoid of anger or vindictiveness. I felt nothing but cold, absolute closure. You left me standing on the sidewalk in the freezing, pouring rain. With a single suitcase, I reminded him quietly, ensuring my words sliced cleanly through his remaining shredded pride. You laughed with your friends while you stole the business I helped you build from the ground up. Marcus swallowed hard, his hands trembling violently as he realized his carefully constructed victim routine had failed spectacularly. Zara. I can change, he stammered desperately, grasping blindly at invisible straws. We can negotiate a new deal. I will do whatever you want. Just give me my company back, please. I offered him a warm, surprisingly gentle smile, the kind of genuine smile that completely unnerved him. I reached into my bag one final time and pulled out a sleek silver pen alongside a single sheet of heavy legal paper. You know what, Marcus? I said, my tone incredibly agreeable and light. I actually believe that carrying around this dark anger is terrible for the soul. I forgive you. He exhaled a massive, shaky breath of profound, overwhelming relief, his tense shoulders instantly dropping. A hopeful, greedy light immediately reignited in his eyes. He eagerly reached his hands out, fully expecting me to hand over the controlling documents to his precious tech firm. He truly thought he had successfully manipulated his way out of total financial ruin. I uncapped the silver pen and smoothly signed my name on the bottom line of the legal document I was holding. I capped the pen securely and let the heavy silence stretch for a fraction of a second, holding his gaze. I looked down deeply into his expectant, greedy eyes. I accept your apology, I stated clearly, handing him the freshly signed document. But I just finalized the paperwork to completely liquidate every single one of the company's assets. I sold the valuable patents, dissolved the corporate infrastructure, and donated the remaining capital to charity. Your shares are now worth exactly zero. Marcus stared at the signed document as if the ink was burning his skin. His breath hitched, producing a pathetic wheezing sound as the reality of his financial ruin set in. He had traded his pride for nothing. I stepped over his trembling legs and turned away, shifting my focus to the far side of the ballroom. Trent had been watching the public execution with wide, terrified eyes. The arrogant sneer that occupied Trent's face was eradicated, replaced by the panic of a trapped animal. He subtly took a step backward, his shoes making no sound against the marble floor as he began inching toward the oak doors at the back of the hall. Trent thought he was being incredibly stealthy. He kept his head lowered, attempting to blend into the shadows of the floral arrangements lining the perimeter. He needed to escape this nightmare immediately. He needed to access whatever hidden accounts he had left and vanish before his fraudulent activities were fully uncovered. He reached the heavy brass handles of the exit doors and shoved his weight against them, expecting the cool night air to greet him. The doors did not budge a single millimeter. Trent shoved harder, a desperate grunt escaping his lips. Two towering security guards stepped out from the alcove, their massive frames entirely blocking the exit. They crossed their arms in perfect unison, staring down at Trent with cold, unyielding expressions. Julian stood casually near the champagne tower, looking completely undisturbed by the chaos. He took a deliberate sip of the expensive vintage, his piercing gaze locked directly onto Trent. "Leaving so soon, Trent?" Julian called out, his voice echoing across the silent room. "We have not even cut the wedding cake yet. It would be rude to depart before the final course is served." Trent spun around his face, slick with terrified sweat. He pointed a shaking finger at Julian, his voice cracking wildly. You cannot hold me here against my will. This is kidnapping. I demand you tell your thugs to open those doors immediately. Julian chuckled softly, swirling the golden liquid in his glass. No one is kidnapping you, Trent. We are simply ensuring all guests remain present for a very important announcement regarding your corporate history. Jasmine stepped forward, studying the pathetic man she had once called her husband. The missing pieces of their marriage were snapping into a clear picture. You used my signature, correct? Jasmine stated, her voice slicing perfectly through the tension. Trent flinched, his eyes darting back and forth, looking for an escape route that did not exist. I remember that night 3 years ago. Jasmine continued, her tone growing dangerously cold and precise. You woke me up at 2 in the morning, shoving a stack of corporate tax documents into my face. You told me it was just standard spousal consent forms for a new joint venture. You screamed at me for asking questions and told me I was too stupid to understand corporate finance. You forced me to sign them just so I could go back to sleep. Trent shook his head, taking another desperate step backward, until his spine collided forcefully with the solid chest of a security guard. You do not know what you are talking about, he stammered, his voice jumping an octave. Those were legitimate documents. I was building a future for us. Jasmine let out a harsh laugh that commanded the attention of every guest in the room. You were building a shield for yourself, she shot back, stepping right into his personal space. You took those signatures and opened 5 different dummy corporations under my name. You funneled millions of dollars of stolen capital through those accounts, making me the primary liable party for your tax evasion scheme. You systematically set up your wife to take the fall when the federal auditors finally came knocking. The wealthy guests began muttering furiously, disgusted by the sheer depth of his cowardly betrayal. Throwing a spouse to the wolves to save his own skin was a line even the ruthless corporate sharks found despicable. His tailored suit, already ruined by the vintage wine Jasmine had dumped over his head, clung to his sweating body like a heavy shroud. I had to do it, he blurted out, the pathetic confession tearing from his throat. The creditors were breathing down my neck. I needed a clean entity to secure the temporary bridge loans. It was supposed to be a short fix. I was going to pay it all back before anyone noticed the missing capital. Jasmine stared at him with absolute disgust. You never intended to pay a single dime back, she declared firmly. You were draining the accounts dry to fund your lifestyle while secretly packing a bag to flee the country. You wanted to leave me holding the bag for your wire fraud. Julian walked across the ballroom, his footsteps echoing ominously. He handed his empty champagne flute to a passing waiter and stopped directly beside Jasmine. You made one critical miscalculation when you decided to use your wife as a human shield, Julian stated, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. You assumed she had no one in her corner who could afford to look into your paper trail. You severely underestimated the resources of the Vanguard Empire. The heavy oak doors at the back of the reception hall swung open with a loud crash. The 2 security guards stepped aside, clearing a wide path. Trent whirled around, his eyes widening in horror as his worst nightmare materialized right in front of him. 2 stern federal agents walked briskly into the wedding hall, their dark suits and grim expressions cutting through the festive atmosphere. The lead agent pulled a folded document from his pocket, leveling a cold glare directly at the ruined aristocrat. Trenton Sterling, the agent announced loudly, his voice echoing with finality. We hold a federal warrant for your immediate arrest for multiple counts of aggravated wire fraud. The heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing through the silent ballroom sounded like a definitive gunshot ending Trent's pathetic reign. He did not fight back or offer any further arrogant remarks as the federal agents forcefully spun him around and secured his wrists tightly behind his ruined suit jacket. His face was entirely drained of color, transforming into a sickening shade of pale gray as they marched him aggressively toward the grand exit. The wealthy guests parted instantly, like the Red Sea, desperate to avoid any association with the disgraced aristocrat being hauled away in utter humiliation. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, leaving a suffocating heavy vacuum in their wake. The sheer shock of the arrest held the room completely captive for only a fleeting moment before absolute chaos erupted. Brenda shattered the silence with a shrill, piercing shriek that physically grated against my eardrums. Her carefully constructed high society facade dissolved, entirely exposing the bitter, vicious woman hiding underneath the expensive cosmetic procedures and designer fabrics. She stomped across the marble floor, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She bypassed the shattered remnants of Trent's dignity and marched directly toward me, pointing a violently shaking finger at my face. "You vindictive and miserable little monster!" Brenda hissed, her voice vibrating with pure, uncontrolled fury. "You planned this entire spectacle just to humiliate us. You could not stand seeing your sister having a perfect day while you ended up with nothing. Look around you, Zara. Look at what your petty jealousy has accomplished. You have completely destroyed the biggest day of our family's history. You dragged federal agents into a private celebration and ruined Serena's wedding just to satisfy your own sick vendetta against people who actually belong in this tier of society." I did not flinch or step back from her toxic tirade. I simply maintained a cold, unyielding gaze, watching her utterly break down in front of her country club peers. My silence only infuriated her further. She waved her arms frantically toward the center of the room, demanding I look at the collateral damage of my actions. Serena stood frozen near the towering 5-tier wedding cake, looking like a fragile porcelain doll that had just been pushed off a high shelf. Her stunning designer gown seemed to swallow her small frame entirely. Her hands covered her mouth, and thick, heavy tears streamed rapidly down her cheeks, completely ruining her flawless bridal makeup. Her dream wedding, the elaborate fantasy Brenda had meticulously orchestrated for social leverage, was rapidly deteriorating into a scandalous crime scene right before her tear-filled eyes. She looked absolutely lost, surrounded by whispering guests who were already typing furious text messages to spread the scandalous gossip across the city. Brenda continued screaming, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You are a toxic disease, Zara. You always have been. You never belonged in this family, and you certainly do not belong in this room. You are going to pay for this. I will make absolutely sure you are blacklisted from every respectable establishment in this entire state." I completely ignored Brenda's hysterical threats, treating her like irrelevant background noise. I stepped smoothly around her frantically gesturing form, leaving her sputtering in mid-sentence. My heels clicked softly against the floor as I closed the distance between myself and the trembling bride. The surrounding guests naturally stepped back, giving me a wide, unobstructed path. Serena squeezed her eyes shut tightly, bracing herself for what she assumed would be another devastating blow. She visibly braced for me to unleash my fury on her, just as I had systematically dismantled Trent and Marcus. Instead, I reached out gently and placed my hands firmly on her trembling shoulders. She opened her swollen eyes, looking at me with a mixture of profound confusion and lingering fear. I reached into my clutch and retrieved a soft, clean handkerchief, gently pressing it into her shaking hands. "Breathe, Serena." I instructed, my tone entirely devoid of the cold authority I had used just moments prior. "I am not here to hurt you. I never was." I held her panicked gaze, forcing her to actually look at me. "Do you remember the 4th grade when Brenda deliberately forgot to pack my lunch for an entire week because she claimed she was too busy planning your extravagant birthday party?" Serena sniffled softly, nodding her head a tiny fraction of an inch. I remember I continued, my voice steady and loud enough for Brenda to hear every single word. "I sat on the bleachers alone, completely starving, watching all the other children eat. And you were the only person who walked over to me. You sat down in the dirt, risking ruining your pristine white dress, and you split your sandwich perfectly in half. You handed me your favorite juice box, and you did not say a single word about it. You just sat with me so I would not feel entirely invisible. You showed me genuine kindness when the rest of this toxic household treated me like a worthless burden," I added softly, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "That is the exact reason why I am not going to let Brenda ruin your special night. You deserve to celebrate your marriage without the suffocating weight of their corruption hanging over your head." I turned my attention away from my stunned sister and snapped my fingers sharply, signaling the highly nervous hotel manager who had been cowering near the grand catering entrance. He practically sprinted across the polished ballroom floor, stopping breathlessly at my side, waiting for instructions. I smoothly extracted a heavy, solid metal black card from my designer wallet, holding it firmly between my fingers. I handed the hotel manager my black card, tapping the dark metallic surface twice for emphasis. Upgrade the wedding package to platinum, I commanded smoothly. The party continues, but the trash needs to be taken out. The hotel manager grabbed the black card with trembling hands, nodding furiously before scurrying away to execute my orders. Two towering security guards dressed in dark suits immediately stepped forward to carry out the second half of my directive. They flanked Brenda, their massive frames casting long shadows over her evening gown. She looked absolutely ridiculous, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish as the reality of her eviction registered. Marcus remained completely frozen on the floor, his eyes hollow and vacant, while Layla frantically tried to gather her scattered dignity and her oversized designer handbag. "Get your filthy hands off me!" Brenda shrieked, swatting wildly at the guard who gently but firmly grasped her upper arm. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I am a founding member of the First Cathedral Executive Board. I funded the new fellowship hall. You cannot throw me out of this grand wedding reception." The guard remained unimpressed by her frantic resume reading. "Ma'am, you need to vacate the premises immediately," he stated in a flat, unyielding tone that brokered zero negotiation. He applied a fraction more pressure to her arm, forcing her to stumble forward. Another guard hauled Marcus to his feet by the collar of his ruined tuxedo. The former tech CEO looked entirely lifeless, his legs moving mechanically as he was dragged toward the main exit. Layla scrambled behind them, her face flushed a humiliating crimson. The path to the double doors stretched across the entire length of the ballroom, cutting directly through the heart of the guest seating area. Brenda had meticulously curated this guest list to showcase her ultimate triumph to her beloved church congregation. The room was packed with elite pastors and affluent deacons whom Brenda had spent decades trying to impress. They were the arbiters of high society morality, watching her spectacular downfall from the front row. The music stopped completely, leaving the massive hall blanketed in silence. As the disgraced trio began their forced march, that silence was rapidly replaced by the sharp hiss of frantic whispers. The congregation leaned into one another, their eyes wide with poorly concealed delight. Brenda stiffened her spine, desperately attempting to salvage whatever shred of dignity she had left. She lifted her chin high into the air, refusing to make eye contact with the whispering deacons. She adopted a rigid march, trying to project the image of a wronged queen rather than an exposed fraud. Layla was struggling to keep up with the security guards. She was awkwardly clutching the massive, supposedly antique Ming vase she had proudly paraded into the reception earlier. She had loudly boasted that the vase was a priceless family heirloom, a symbol of her refined taste. It was incredibly heavy, and her trembling hands could barely maintain a solid grip on the smooth porcelain surface. Brenda marched blindly forward, her chin tilted high. Layla abruptly stopped to adjust her slipping high heel directly in the path. The collision was spectacular and entirely unavoidable. Brenda slammed forcefully into Layla, letting out a sharp yelp of surprise as she lost her balance. Layla shrieked, her arms flailing wildly as the massive vase slipped from her grasp. The supposedly priceless antique hit the solid marble floor with a deafening crash. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom, but it did not shatter into delicate shards of ancient porcelain. Instead, it cracked open with a dull thud, sending thick chunks of cheap plaster skittering across the polished floor. A visible barcode sticker, clearly stamped with the logo of a discount home goods store, fluttered pathetically to the ground from the inside of the broken base. The collective gasp from the congregation was audible. The grand illusion of wealth and sophistication dissolved instantly into a pile of cheap plaster. I stepped forward, my eyes scanning the pathetic wreckage of the fake vase and the three ruined individuals standing amidst the debris. I remembered the countless times Brenda had paraded fake designer bags through the church doors, demanding respect and adoration for her fabricated wealth. She had built her entire social standing on smoke mirrors and crushing debt, constantly lecturing me about projecting an image of flawless prosperity. Sister Jenkins, the notoriously sharp and cruel head of the church hospitality committee, leaned over her table. She did not bother to lower her voice as she stared directly at the cheap barcode sticker resting near the expensive shoes. "Well, well, would you look at that?" Sister Jenkins announced, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. All that endless, loud, pathetic bragging. All that sanctimonious talk about building black excellence, and it turns out it was just a mask for black fraud. The brutal comment sliced through the tension like a razor. A ripple of suppressed laughter swept through the congregation. Brenda froze her eyes, locking onto the cheap plaster shards and the damning barcode sticker. The words echoed in her mind, destroying the last pillar of her fabricated identity. Something inside Brenda snapped with terrifying finality. The carefully controlled matriarch lost her mind. She let out a guttural scream of pure rage, dropping into the scattered plaster. She began wildly scooping up the broken pieces, desperately trying to hide the discount sticker. Her hands shaking so violently, she dropped more than she collected. "Stop looking at me!" she shrieked hysterically at the whispering congregation. "We are excellent. We are wealthy. You are all just jealous of my family. Stop looking at me." The security guards did not hesitate. They grabbed Brenda by the arms, hauling her kicking and screaming off the marble floor. She thrashed wildly, her gown tearing as they dragged her backward toward the exit. Marcus and Layla shrank away, lowering their heads in profound shame as they were herded out alongside the hysterical woman. The heavy oak doors finally swung shut behind them, cutting off the frantic screams and permanently sealing them out of the society they had tried to manipulate. The heavy thud of the brass latches echoing through the grand hall signaled the absolute end of an era. The remaining guests stood in stunned silence, staring at the closed doors, as if trying to process the sheer magnitude of the social execution they had just witnessed. Slowly, the wedding band began playing a soft jazz melody, attempting to restore order to the chaotic atmosphere. But the damage was permanent and absolute. I turned my attention away from the exit and scanned the room for my sister. Jasmine was sitting alone at a small table near the shattered remains of the fake Ming vase. She looked incredibly small, her posture defeated despite the massive victory we had just secured. Her hands were buried deep in her hair, and her shoulders shook with violent, silent sobs. She had spent years trying to survive in a war zone constructed by Trent and Brenda, and the sudden absolute quiet was completely overwhelming her fragile nervous system. I walked toward her, waving off a waiter who tried to offer me another glass of champagne. I pulled out a velvet chair and sat directly beside her. I did not offer any triumphant speeches or gloat about destroying the people who had tortured us. I simply reached out and placed my hand gently over hers. Jasmine flinched at the physical contact before slowly raising her head. Her face was entirely blotchy, her mascara smeared across her cheekbones in jagged lines. "I am so pathetic, Zara," she whispered, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of profound shame. "I sat there for 3 years and let that monster systematically destroy my entire life. I signed those fraudulent documents. I let Brenda dictate how I dressed, how I spoke, and who I was allowed to associate with. I hated myself every morning when I woke up next to him, but I was too terrified to walk out the front door. I enabled their abuse because I was completely paralyzed by the fear of becoming a public failure." I pulled a fresh napkin from the table setting and carefully wiped the dark, smeared makeup from under her swollen eyes. "You were not enabling them, Jasmine," I stated firmly, my voice projecting unwavering certainty. "You were surviving a highly sophisticated psychological trap designed specifically to break your spirit. Brenda spent our entire childhood teaching us that our worth was directly tied to obedience and wealthy marriages. She conditioned you to accept abuse disguised as high society tradition. I remember when we were teenagers and you wanted to study biology." Brenda laughed in your face and threw your university brochures directly into the fireplace, telling you that a woman's only real achievement was securing a husband with a platinum credit card. She systematically isolated you from your own dreams so Trent could easily isolate you from your own bank accounts. You are not pathetic. You are a brave survivor who just walked out of a burning building. Jasmine let out a shuddering breath, leaning her head against my shoulder. The physical weight of her relief was palpable. For the first time in over a decade, she did not have to pretend to be a flawless, obedient society wife. She did not have to carefully monitor her words to avoid triggering Trent's volatile temper or Brenda's vicious criticism. The tears that fell now were completely different from the panicked weeping I had witnessed earlier. These were tears of pure exhaustion and profound release. But I have absolutely nothing left, she confessed softly, her fingers tracing the edge of the linen tablecloth. Trent drained my personal accounts to fund his fraudulent shell companies. Brenda made sure I alienated every single genuine friend I ever had. I am 30 years old, and I am completely starting over from zero. I do not even know how to begin rebuilding a life that belongs to me anymore. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents I had used to completely obliterate Trent's arrogant facade. I placed the heavy parchment paper directly onto the table, sliding it carefully toward her trembling hands. "You are not starting over from zero, Jasmine," I corrected her smoothly, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "You are starting over with a massive corporate advantage." I tapped the top page of the legally binding contract, specifically highlighting the newly registered corporate hierarchy of the Vanguard Empire Real Estate Division. When I bought out Trent's entire portfolio at a catastrophic loss, I did not just acquire his properties. I acquired his entire operational infrastructure. I own the buildings, the management contracts, and the lucrative development rights. But I have absolutely no interest in running a real estate firm on a daily basis. My expertise is strictly in corporate acquisitions and hostile takeovers. I need someone I can actually trust to manage this massive portfolio. I need someone who intimately knows the ins and outs of those properties because she was forced to memorize their ledgers. Jasmine stared blankly at the complex legal documents, her mind struggling to process the incredible magnitude of the information. She looked up at me, her tear-stained face reflecting a mixture of absolute shock and cautious, desperate hope. "What exactly are you saying, Zara?" she asked, her voice barely above an awed whisper. I slid a sleek silver pen across the table, placing it deliberately right next to the contract. "I am saying that Trent's former empire requires a brand new executive leader," I announced clearly, ensuring my words carried the weight of a permanent life-changing reality. "I am officially offering you the position of Chief Executive Officer of the newly restructured Vanguard Real Estate Group. You are going to take the exact company Trent used to financially abuse you, and you are going to rebuild it into an unstoppable industry powerhouse. You are going to sign your name on that dotted line and take your power back right now." Jasmine stared at the silver pen for a fraction of a second before snatching it up. Her hand moved across the signature line with a fierce, jerky motion that permanently severed her ties to Trent's suffocating control. The moment the ink dried on the contract, the entire atmosphere of the ballroom shifted dramatically. The suffocating tension evaporated, replacing the heavy dread with a sudden vibrant wave of genuine celebration. The hotel manager had executed my platinum upgrade orders with astonishing speed. A small army of waiters flooded the venue, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and delicious warm appetizers. These premium offerings cost more than Brenda's entire catering budget combined. The dim, oppressive lighting transitioned into a warm, golden glow that bathed the room in elegant light. The jazz band, previously playing cautious background music, switched to a lively, soulful rhythm that commanded absolute attention. I looked across the massive dance floor and saw Serena laughing freely in her new husband's arms. Her wet face was completely transformed, radiating a pure, unadulterated joy that Brenda had actively tried to suppress for months. The toxic poison that had infected our family for decades was finally eradicated from the premises forever. Julian materialized beside my table, looking effortlessly devastating in his tailored dark suit. His sharp eyes scanned the joyful room before locking directly onto mine, with a look of profound admiration. He extended a strong, elegant hand toward me, offering a warm smile that instantly melted away the cold corporate armor I had worn all evening. You have successfully dismantled a fraudulent empire and resurrected two of your sisters in less than an hour, he murmured, his deep voice rumbling smoothly over the lively music. I believe the conquering executive has officially earned a dance with her extremely loyal husband. I placed my hand in his, letting him pull me smoothly from my soft velvet chair. We glided onto the polished marble floor, blending seamlessly into the crowd of celebrating guests. His arm wrapped securely around my waist, pulling me flush against his solid chest. The physical contact grounded me instantly, anchoring me in the beautiful reality we had created together. We swayed gracefully to the rhythm, letting the joyous music wash over us. Julian rested his chin gently against my temple, his breathing perfectly synchronized with mine. I remember walking into that decaying diner 5 years ago, he whispered. His words were meant only for my ears. You were wearing a stained uniform, pouring terrible coffee for miserable customers at 2 in the morning. Your family had completely cut you off, leaving you absolutely nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a mountain of their fabricated debt. You looked so incredibly exhausted, but your eyes were burning with a fierce fire I had never seen before. You were hiding behind the greasy counter, scribbling aggressive financial projections on cheap paper napkins between serving sticky tables. I pulled back slightly to look directly into his handsome face again. I vividly remembered the bitter cold of that tiny, unheated studio apartment I returned to every night. You offered to pay off all my debts that very first night. I reminded him, a soft laugh escaping my lips. You tried to hand me a blank check and told me I belonged in a boardroom instead of a filthy diner. You refused to take a single dime from me, Julian countered, his eyes shining with absolute reverence. You looked at a billionaire investor and told me to keep my charity because you were going to buy the entire city block tomorrow. And then you actually did it without any financial assistance. You took a miserable bank loan, secured a decaying commercial property, and flipped it into a massive profit within 4 months. You built the Vanguard empire brick by brick, negotiating every hostile takeover and outsmarting every arrogant man who dared to underestimate your intellect. I watched you turn the severe trauma your mother inflicted into pure, unyielding ambition. You did not just survive their brutal abuse, Zara. You weaponized your pain and conquered the entire real estate industry. I smiled brightly, resting my head against his warm chest once again. I felt the steady, comforting beat of his beautiful heart. I could not have done it without your guidance, I admitted truthfully. You taught me how to harness my explosive anger into a calculated strategy. You showed me what genuine partnership actually looked like when I had no healthy examples. Our intimate moment was suddenly interrupted by a joyous squeal cutting through the jazz music. A tiny figure in a sparkling silver dress broke away from the crowd of dancing children. Our precious 6-year-old daughter, Mia, sprinted across the slippery marble floor, her laughter ringing out beautifully loud. She hurled herself directly at us, throwing her small arms around our legs with reckless abandon. Julian chuckled warmly, scooping her up in one fluid motion and spinning her around until she shrieked with pure delight. She wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, planting a messy kiss on his cheek before reaching out for me. I kissed her forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of vanilla shampoo. She was the absolute center of our universe, a beautiful living testament to the healthy, loving family cycle we had actively chosen to create against all the terrible odds we faced together. We were ensuring she would never experience the conditional love and toxic manipulation I had endured. Julian gently set Mia down, gesturing for her to stand beside me. The music shifted to a slow romantic ballad, and the crowd naturally parted, creating a wide circle around us. Julian took a step back, his expression turning incredibly serious. He reached into his jacket pocket and slowly descended onto one knee in the middle of the crowded ballroom. "Zara, my brilliant wife," he declared loudly, Will you renew our vows and let this beautiful moment completely overshadow our dark, painful past forever? I stared down at the handsome man who had seen my absolute worst and loved me fiercely through every single fraction of it. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom, but this time it was born of genuine delight, rather than scandalous horror. Mia tugged eagerly at the hem of my designer dress, her wide eyes darting between her kneeling father and my stunned expression. I did not need to calculate the risks or analyze the financial projections of this specific merger. I dropped to my knees right beside him, completely ignoring the expensive silk pooling on the cold marble floor. I wrapped my arms securely around his neck and pulled him into a kiss that communicated 1,000 unspoken promises. The jazz band immediately launched into an upbeat, incredibly triumphant melody, and the remaining guests erupted into authentic roaring applause. Serena and Jasmine rushed the crowded dance floor, pulling Mia into a joyful embrace, while Julian lifted me effortlessly back to my feet. The toxic shadows that had haunted my entire existence were permanently banished forever, replaced by the brilliant, blinding light of a family I had actively chosen to build. 3 years later, the heavy rain drummed a rhythmic, soothing beat against the tinted windows of my chauffeured Maybach. The plush leather interior smelled of expensive espresso and Julian's signature cedar cologne. I sat comfortably in the back seat, tapping away on my tablet, finalizing the quarterly reports for the Vanguard Empire's newest philanthropic division. Jasmine had officially taken over the real estate branch, transforming it into a highly ethical, wildly profitable powerhouse. Serena was currently traveling the globe with her new husband, sending us vibrant, glossy postcards from exotic cities Brenda had never even learned to pronounce. I carefully locked the glowing tablet screen and shifted my full gaze toward the dark, slick, rain-soaked streets of downtown Seattle, gliding rapidly past my tinted window. My dedicated driver, Thomas, smoothly slowed the massive vehicle as we approached a highly congested intersection near the industrial district. Through the rain-streaked glass, a familiar, incredibly pathetic figure caught my immediate attention. Marcus stood shivering violently beneath a faded, aggressively yellow awning, wearing a cheap, poorly fitting polyester uniform that was completely soaked. He was frantically shoving wet, discarded cardboard boxes into a massive, overflowing industrial dumpster. The former tech CEO, who used to arrogantly dismiss my intellect at high society dinners, was now verbally arguing with a teenage shift manager over a mandatory 15-minute unscheduled break. His shoulders were permanently slumped forward, his face deeply weathered by the harsh, unrelenting reality of minimum wage labor. Thomas caught my eye in the rearview mirror, his hand hovering expectantly over the window control panel, silently asking if I wanted to roll the glass down and make my victorious presence known. I simply shook my head once, a gesture of absolute unbothered dismissal. Marcus was simply not worth the minimal physical effort of a single gloating remark. My thoughts briefly drifted to Trent, currently residing in a maximum security federal penitentiary cell. The ambitious prosecuting attorneys had effectively utilized the massive mountain of irrefutable fraudulent documents I provided to secure a brutal 20-year sentence without the possibility of early parole. He had desperately attempted to contact Jasmine exactly once from a monitored prison phone, pathetically begging for emergency legal funding. She had calmly hung up the phone and immediately changed her number. Brenda's ultimate fate was arguably much worse than any federal confinement. Following her hysterical, uncontrollable meltdown at the wedding, the First Cathedral Executive Board had convened an emergency meeting. Sister Jenkins personally ensured Brenda was permanently expelled from the congregation, citing moral bankruptcy and financial fraud. The high society country clubs instantly revoked her exclusive memberships. Brenda now lived in a tiny, heavily mortgaged apartment on the absolute outskirts of the city, utterly shunned by the exact community she had callously sacrificed her own daughters to impress. She spent her lonely days aggressively commenting on local news articles, using fake social media accounts entirely invisible to the world. I turned completely away from the cold, wet window, voluntarily leaving Marcus to wrestle with the soggy cardboard in the freezing, relentless rain. The heavy privacy partition slowly rolled down quietly, revealing Julian sitting comfortably beside me, meticulously reviewing a complex legal brief. Mia was nestled securely between us, fast asleep with her delicate head resting heavily on my shoulder. Julian felt my focused gaze and glanced up, his dark, intelligent eyes instantly softening with deep affection. He carefully reached across the supple leather seat, threading his strong fingers seamlessly through mine. "You are staring at us like you just conquered the entire world," he murmured warmly, bringing my knuckles to his lips for a soft, lingering kiss. I leaned my head back against the luxurious leather headrest, a profound, unshakable peace settling deep within my tired bones. I had spent the first 20 years of my life desperately trying to figure out exactly how to earn a seat at a table that was actively designed to starve me. I had foolishly allowed Brenda's vicious narrative to dictate my worth, internalizing every cruel insult and dismissive sneer she threw in my direction. But driving past the physical manifestations of their ruined lives, I realized something incredibly liberating. The ultimate revenge was never about destroying their fraudulent empires or exposing their pathetic lies to their hypocritical friends. The sweetest, most devastating payoff was the absolute total indifference I felt toward them right now. I looked at my brilliant husband and my beautiful, deeply loved little daughter. I did not need to roll down a window to gloat at a miserable man standing in the freezing rain, because my life was entirely too rich to pause for a peasant's misery. I squeezed Julian's hand tightly, a fierce, absolutely brilliant smile lighting up my face. The true victory was finally understanding that I had legitimately become a powerful queen the exact moment I permanently stopped seeking a peasant's approval.